This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Leslie Grandy, who is an author, speaker, and CEO advisor who guides companies, teams, and product leaders to expand their creative capacity to invent and innovate for customers, disrupt and grow their market opportunities, and maintain relevance in a fast-changing world. Organizations like Oracle, Starbucks, and Red Robin Gourmet Burgers turn to Leslie to ignite creativity across their workforce and empower everyone, regardless of the role or level, to identify novel solutions and think expansively. Leslie's book, Creative Velocity, debuts in early 2025, so that will be coming out very soon. Leslie's career has taken her on a 25-plus year journey from a successful career in the film industry in Los Angeles as a member of the Directors Guild of America to iconic brands such as Amazon, Best Buy, Discovery, T-Mobile, and Apple. She's built teams from the ground up and led multiple first-to-market products. She was on the front end of the earliest digital media subscription services from major content brands like Major League Baseball, NASCAR, CNN, and ABC News, and co-authored a patent currently held by Intel. She co-created and serves as the lead executive in residence in the Product Management Leadership Accelerator, which is part of the Foster School's executive education program at the University of Washington. She is a member of the Board of Advisors and adjunct faculty at Regis College's Marshall Sloan School of Business in Product Management and Service Design, and West Virginia University's College of Creative Arts and Media. So, Leslie, welcome to the program. It is great to have you on.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So that's quite a resume. It seems like you've done a lot of cool and fun things over your career. But let's just start with a little context. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got to LA in the film and TV industry, and now you're working in the business world. So just give us a little summary of that
Sure.
journey.
I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. My father was a family practitioner with his office attached to our house, and my mother was a English professor at Villanova University. And so I had very high achieving parents. But in addition to their academic achievements, they were also very much into the arts. My father could play piano without reading music, and my mother was a painter. And so they were very supportive of my taking lessons in art and drama and music. And I wanted so much to be a creative person. So we spent a lot of time in my childhood trying to find my medium, but I really wasn't good at anything. In fact, several teachers suggested it was a diminishing returns experience for them if
Oh my
I
gosh.
kept going. And so I really struggled with the idea that I would probably be a left brain type of person working in science and math and analytics. And I was good at those, but I didn't enjoy them and I wanted to be creative. I really wanted to find my medium. And when I was in high school, I got a chance to work on a film, an independent study project, because I wasn't able to fit an English class in my schedule. And so I set about and I made a film, and it won a Young Filmmakers Award. And I thought, voila, I've now found my talent. And
Wow.
so I told my parents I'm going to move to Hollywood and go to college and be in the film industry. And the compromise I had to make was that I could only go as far away from Philadelphia as I could drive home in a day. And I had to have a film major because that's what I wanted to do. So Northwestern is where I went to college because it was 12 hours by car home, and it had a film major that I could do. And as soon as I graduated, I moved to California and started working in the film industry. But I didn't work in the creative side of filmmaking. I wasn't a stylist. I wasn't a writer. I didn't design the sets. I was really just the person who managed the production. I was the person who worked on set, solving problems and making it happen. If a director wanted to shoot on an aircraft carrier, I'd go figure out how to do that. Or if they wanted to block off the Stanford Shopping Center in the middle of a day when we had no permits, I would figure out how to make that happen. And so
Okay.
over time, I realized that I wasn't necessarily operating in a creative function, but I had this capacity to keep working because I was known for being able to figure hard problems out. When I finally decided I didn't really want to stay in that career in my 30s and 40s, I went back to business school to UW. And my first job was making the IPO roadshow film for a company that was going public called Vizio. And in that process, I was introduced to the chief marketing officer of the company who really appreciated that I just single handedly did that without a whole lot of oversight and micromanagement from him, and said, "This is somebody who probably can figure out whatever it is we throw at her." So they hired me as a associate product manager, which is the most junior kind of role you could have. But they hired me because they felt that figuring stuff out was a real asset. And
Yeah.
in that role, product management, that's really what you do is you kind of figure out how to take all the other people who do things, the engineers and the designers, and you try to get something that people will be excited to use and excited to buy, which is very similar to the film industry, right? You try to coalesce all those people who know how to do something you don't into a product that people will pay money for. And so I realized in that journey that my creative capacity was that creative problem solving, that actually was my creative superpower. And that's what kept me working in the film industry. It also what got me into some amazing companies that I was able to work for. And that creative superpower was something that I realized I had to coach other people to find. And ultimately, when I retired from Amazon in 2023, I decided to pitch a book proposal to Wiley on the concept of everybody is creative and they just need to be able to understand how to unlock it. And that's how the book was born. So that
Yeah.
was my journey of creative self awareness that ultimately helped me become a better coach and a leader of creative teams.
And that's amazing. What a great story. And not only are we uh, virtually neighbors with you being in Seattle, but I also went to Northwestern. I went to Northwestern Physical Therapy School. So
Ah, great
love
school, great
great
school.
school, great school. So that's for sure. So now, as we move forward here, and you've had this vast experience, but you're helping other companies do great things and helping leaders grow and so on. We come into this world where there's just so much talk about AI and how that's going to work and how it's going to go, and there's excitement about it, but there's also fear about it. So, what can leaders and companies do to integrate AI, into their systems without sacrificing authenticity or innovation?
That's such an excellent question because I do think there's such a rush to bring it in that people aren't actually evaluating the technology in the way you pose the question, right? I think that's the real sweet spot right now is for people to actually see how AI can enhance the capacity of a team, not through automation, but through creative collaboration. And as a
Yeah.
creative catalyst and allowing people the opportunity to use AI, not so much to, again, automate processes or eliminate jobs, but to actually lift and elevate the capacity of the people that are working. That is something that comes from creative leadership, where leaders recognize that all people can contribute creative ideas, that all people can actually become creative problem solvers when given the right tool and the right frameworks to work within. And so I think creative leaders really need to see the application of AI as a tool that actually develops greater capacity within team members.
Yeah, and it's so, I've said this before, but when we look at our education system and kind of how we go through school and even college to a certain degree, it's a lot of checking off the boxes. It's a lot of tasks type of thing. And then we're thrown into this world that we're supposed to be creative and we're supposed to be leaders. Um, and so I look at that as kind of, if AI can do a lot of the check off the boxes and the tasks that sometimes people feel comfort in doing because that's what they're familiar with, it frees up more time, as you said, to be creative and to find ways to be leaders as opposed to doing the busy work or the check the box stuff that maybe seems comforting in some way, but if something can do it faster and better, why not?
Yeah, I think that's one aspect of it for sure is eliminate the drudgery of the job to give somebody the capacity to do things that the machine cannot. I think that's partly the point. The other aspect of it though that I really feel is treating it like it's a collaborator in creative thinking, not just looking at outsourcing tasks so I can be more creative, but a lot of people haven't figured out how to tap their own creative soul. And
Yeah.
so part of the process that I think AI can be is sort of that kind of coach of creative confidence, right? The idea that I could have a conversation with the machine and learn something and expand my mind and consider options that I wouldn't have considered from my own lived experiences, or that I'm really emotionally attached to an idea but AI is not. So maybe AI can come up with 5 ideas I would never have thought of that would help me expand my thinking. I think that's the real opportunity when you're a leader and you give people permission, right, to have that partnership that actually gives them the confidence to solve greater problems than they think they can do on their own. And I think that's an amplification that AI can do that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, for sure. And you talked about in the book too, this is what you call structured play, and that at Google and REI, you brought this into their organizations. So tell us a little bit about what structured play is and how that works with your leadership training.
Yeah, so structured play is it's this combination of problem solving with a mechanism that looks playful. And by using something like Legos, for example, which is a brand of children's toys, but actually gets reconfigured as a brainstorming solution in the Lego serious play methodology. The idea here is that you're using something that doesn't look like what your problem is to actually explore the problem. And so this structured form of play allows you to look at the problem in more amorphous terms, looking at it in emotion or in feel or in experiential ways. And so with structured play, you demonstrate the idea in ways that aren't typical. You're not looking to mold something out of clay to look like something. You're actually using these random pieces to express something. And there's a lot of forms of structured play beyond the Lego solution. One of them is a version called the Exquisite Corpse. And in that, you actually look at it like it's a table game, and each person has a responsibility for an element of the human form that's being built, but they're doing it by creating imagery to represent the head or to represent the arms. And in the case of this exquisite corpse, they may put wings into the arms, but you won't see that if you're the person that follows them. You may be very literal and put actual pant legs as the legs. And so when the whole thing is revealed, you actually see this combinational view of what this form looks like as it's collected by all of the various people who contributed to it. And that really opens up your thinking to metaphors and to analogies and ways that people might express the capacity of the human form, but not using, oh, I'm going to cut a head out of this model and now I'm done.
Mm.
You have to actually think of what represents the eyes and think of what represents the ears. And maybe the hair is really a cloud because you want to express that someone's a little bit imaginative or impractical or whatever. So you're using these metaphors and analogies to communicate things that are not literal. And in doing that, you're doing it with a group of people. And then what comes together is actually a whole new view of the human form.
There was a whole, I think I read that there's a whole art movement, what, in the 1920s or 30s, where with multiple artists, they would just do that and come up with these pretty amazing paintings by not seeing the whole picture, but just adding their piece.
What it really does, I think, is it focuses on an element of it. It focuses on one specific part, but it becomes part of this combinational view. And in doing that, it really helps you sort of pull in and then pull out, right? I'm looking at
Yeah.
just this, but now when I see the whole picture, I can imagine it differently.
You know, another thing that I read in your book is, everyone talks about, how we learn more from our failures than our mistakes. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. Yet, you know, still we don't like to make we don't like to make mistakes. So there's a fear of that. And yet in your book, you say we should celebrate our failures. So, mistakes and failures are you say are the fuel that creativity needs. So,
Exactly.
take that a little further for us.
Sure. One of the things that I learned personally, but also was reinforced by all the interviews in the book, is that uh, a failure as a mistake, when it's seen as a mistake, is a different type of critical analysis of what occurred than what is healthy. That may have been a mistake, but why did you make it? What lived experience might have put you into that situation that you would now want to not do again, right? How do you learn through the process of why that mistake happened rather than just labeling it as a mistake? And so the conscious mind going back and sort of retrospectively and analyzing how you made that mistake actually may open up possibilities for how you succeed in the future. I'll give you a really quick story about this. There's a in the book I mentioned inversion thinking, which is imagining all the ways you could fail, right? And if you actually look at inversion thinking as a creative thinking process, you see the whole point of this is to succeed better, right? Is to mitigate risk, is to understand what could cause failure. And so by accepting failure as a prospect, you might not learn until you run into that moment, but you also could explore failure in advance in a way to be more imaginative about things you could do to avoid failure. And so failure is a part of the creative process, one way or the other, either retrospectively to understand why you missed what could have been a different outcome. But it's also a way to ensure an outcome is successful because you acknowledge that failure is an option.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a real interesting mindset shift, I think, to embrace it and celebrate it, as you said, because most people are afraid of it. I mean, like I said, we can agree that we learn from it, but nobody wants to fail, you know. So,
Yeah, when I started in the film industry and I moved to California and I didn't know a single person in the film industry, I wasn't a nepo baby, I didn't have any connections, and my parents thought it wouldn't last. That's why they wanted me to go to Northwestern because I would outgrow the film industry. But when I got there, I just wanted to prove them wrong. So I thought of all the ways I could fail and just did
yeah.
everything opposite of that. Right? Everything that would make it possible for them to be right were the things I avoided. And so I
Interesting.
think as a strategy, right, accepting failure as a prospect and then working with that knowledge that you want to manage around it, right, that you want to see all the ways that you could avoid facing failure is also a really healthy way of embracing failure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. You also say in the book that what are leadership skills that people really need, and you said self-awareness, which is common, everybody says that, but you also put in curiosity and resilience, and so those are three things that people need, and so I thought that was well put, because curiosity is part of being creative, right?
100%. I think uh, you don't know that you don't know about things in the way that you wish you did when you start out in the film industry. Like if I'd have known how hard it would be to do X, I would probably just think I couldn't do it. But
Hmm.
when you're curious and you realize you don't know how hard it really will be or what you will encounter, you might actually open a door you didn't expect. You might actually find a solution that on its face wasn't apparent because you didn't take the effort to kind of dive in and explore it. And a really good example of this is when I was working at the Washington State Film Office, and I was working with a film producer who was trying to shoot a nuclear sub coming up the Hood Canal. So you'll appreciate this because of where you live. And
Yeah.
you know that that is not a schedule that the Navy publishes, right?
Yeah.
Why would
Yeah.
anyone, know when that's going to happen? They're never going to tell you. They don't want you to know, but it happens on the regular, right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's not an uncommon thing. And it was for a movie called Crimson Tide with Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman. And the
Yep.
producer was really wonderful. He's like, I really got to get an aerial shot of this nuclear sub coming out. I really need to know when they're going to be there. And I thought, well, I could just tell you you're never going to know and not do it. But I was really curious. Is there a way, if I ask the right person the right question, that this might happen? And so I called up somebody at the Navy who I had met while we were filming Sleepless in Seattle in the Sandpoint Naval Station. And I said, hey, this is the movie I'm working on. I know it's not an official Navy movie. You haven't signed off on the script, but here's what I'm looking for. And he said, I know he didn't sign off. He said, but I really love the script and I really like the actors. And I think this is going to be a quality picture. Here's what we'll do. And out of the blue, came up with a sort of a I'm going to call you with 90 minutes notice at the most, and probably closer to 60 minutes. And your people are going to have to get a chopper up there with that much time and go. And I'm not even going to acknowledge that's what we're talking about. I'm going to call you up and say something random. You're not even going to, it's not going to be like, okay, it's ready to go. You're just going to know the clock is ticking.
Wow.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I'm going to call you, and that's it. We'll never talk about this. We'll never discuss this happening. And if you can do it, great. If not, that's it. I called up the producer and he's like, I can get somebody up in the air in 30 minutes. And I was like, perfect. And sure enough, like the next week, the phone rang. It's like the eagle has landed kind of a weird comment.
Right, right.
And then I called the producer and the chopper went up and they got the shot. And again, I was just curious, is there a way to do it? Like I
Yeah.
didn't stop myself from thinking there is no way. I just thought, well, maybe there is a way. And
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
that curiosity really can unlock something because the effort to ask or to seek the information sometimes in itself is all you need to unlock it, right? That's
Yeah.
sometimes all it takes.
Well, that's a great story, but if I would have known you earlier, you could have just come out and hang out at my place because they go by about once every week or sometimes every other week, and they're just so big and so you just
It's
can't believe it.
amazing, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's
amazing.
just
And it's
crazy.
amazing that it's just right there, but
Yeah.
you won't, it's never a clockwork, right? It's not like they go at exactly the same moment. And so I think it just bears asking, right? And
Yeah.
curiosity is about asking questions, right? Just learning what you don't know yet. And if there's an answer, it may not look like the one you thought, but if you didn't ask, you wouldn't find it.
I got a funny story about that too. I was out in my little 10-foot Zodiac skiff one day with my camera, which was unusual. And here comes the sub by. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so great. I've been wanting to get a good picture of it. So took some pictures with my telephoto lens. And then my wife was with me. I said, I'll get a little closer. So get a little closer and get some more pictures. And I said, I want to get a little closer. And she goes, are you sure that's going to be okay? And I go, well, I'll try. So I go up and I get a little closer. And all of a sudden I hear the loudest horn I've ever heard. Boom! Like, okay, buddy, that's close enough. Turn around. And so I did. But anyway.
That's funny.
So you also, I think you have a great way of saying things in the book that just, seem to make a lot of sense to me. So another one thing that you said in the book was creativity is a muscle that strengthens with exercise. I don't think we think of creativity as something that you can develop. I think a lot of people think you either have it or you don't. So tell
Right.
us tell
That
us
was
about
my
your
mistake. Yeah, that's a
yeah.
myth that I felt for most of my childhood into thinking it's a talent. And as a talent, I was looking for my talent, right? That's the mistake. That uh, the real thoughtful, creative person isn't necessarily talented in the arts,
Yeah.
right? I might look at someone who's an inventor and they might not be a painter, an actor, a singer, musician, right? But if they're inventing, they're creating. And so
Yeah.
once you kind of make that leap to think about creativity as something that's more of a skill, it's something you actually have to tap into. And what I see is a lot of people outsourcing their creativity to design teams or to marketers or even to AI, come up with the answer for me. And in doing that, that muscle atrophies. You just don't practice the things that will make creativity more of a second nature skill. And so for me, what I find is analogies are really helpful, right? And so I just love to use analogies because that always makes me think about other things that might be similar. And
Yeah.
then what do those things have in common? And so I practice a lot of my creative thinking through some of these techniques that I use even when I'm coaching people. I
Yeah.
had someone I was working with on an e-commerce site and they wanted to try something out, but they were afraid to try it out because it might decrement the brand. Like it might be, less successful than the brand already was, and they didn't want to dirty the waters with something that was potentially not going to work. And I said, well, think about people who do that and think about sort of like how they do it so that the brand itself stays strong, but that experimental part is also something your customers appreciate because you put it in a way that actually allows them to enjoy your brand for what it is, but actually adventure with your brand into new territory. And so I use the example of the sale room inside Anthropologie, which looks nothing like the rest of the store. And so you can shop the Anthropologie experience and it's lovely and curated and beautifully designed. But if you want to go into the sale room, you're in a different place. It's still
Mm,
all the same clothes from Anthropologie. There is no effort made to curate it. You might not find something that has your size, or you might find something that has a hole in it, but your expectations are set because you've walked into a different zone. And so if you can use analogies to say, what would be our analogy in the digital world for something like that? And so trying to train people to use these techniques actually makes them second nature, which is why practicing them with generative AI is so helpful. The more you do it in private, sort of,
yeah.
in your prompt, in your conversations with the machine, the more confident you'll get you can do it without the machine.
Well, and then you also said, which I thought was was really good, because I've talked a lot about, left brain, right brain, and you make the statement that left brain thinkers can be creative as well, which, again, we wouldn't think that. You always think, oh, it's the right brain thinkers that are being so creative, but you say creativity emerges really from both spheres. So tell us about your theory on that.
Yeah, one of the great examples is if you go back and look at the inventors from way back when, the Isaac Newtons of the world and the Ben Franklins of the world, and you think, how did they figure that stuff out? How did somebody figure out, electricity from a key in a kite? How did somebody figure out gravity from an apple falling down from a tree? Right? These are science truths now, right, that we accept. But somebody had to put those dots together in a way that created something altogether new, and
Yeah.
they were based on science. And again, a lot of scientific theory, right, gets proven over time to be fact, but somebody had to have the theory that it's possible that X and Y could come together to make something you'd never seen before. And
Yeah.
so I think the idea that even science is a creative expression is comes from the kind of classic inventor who didn't have any of the materials or access to the insights that we have today through AI, was figuring how to make a telephone. All of those things happened, based on someone's ability to look non-linearly at what was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. You also stated in the book that in a 2021 study found that 58% of participants believe that creativity accomplishments result, from sudden inspiration. And you kind of make the point that, that's not always true. You got to do your homework first, right?
Absolutely. Well, when you're in a flow state, like for me, my flow state usually happens in a hot shower. That's when I'm connecting dots, right? Like that's when I'm thinking of things. Is that sudden inspiration really? No, that's all the experiences that I've cataloged, all the thoughts that I've had, just coming together in a free form way without any hurdles or obstacles in my thinking, because I'm only using a part of my brain to finish the shower. Or people do it when they're running. Is that really a sudden inspiration? No, it's they found a place where they can access parts of their brain and connect the dots more freely because they're not task oriented. Those tasks take less brain power to complete, and therefore your capacity to connect the dots is increased. And so I think that's why people mistakenly believe it's a light bulb moment, but what it really is the ability to connect the dots more freely when you're in a mindset that isn't about getting stuff done and doing the tasks and moving from X to Y and getting this meeting run and getting these actions handed off.
Mhm.
When you get out of that state, right, then you're in a place where your mind has more freedom to wander. And in that wandering can connect the dots of things that were already in your mind that you hadn't really accessed, that you maybe cataloged from some time before. And so I think that's the mistaken impression that it's a sudden inspiration or a light bulb moment, but it was always there and you just gave yourself the conditions for it to show up.
Yeah, and as you just described too, you kind of maybe let the part of the brain that you're pushing so hard to come up with something relax, and then it kicks into something else. When I was the CEO of a company, I had a stairmaster in my office, and oftentimes sometime during the day I'd get a workout in on the stairmaster. Well, I learned real quickly that I needed a post-it note pad and a pen up there, because during that workout, oh my God, I had this great idea, that I was just worried about getting a good workout, but something pops into your mind. So as you said, it's not just out of nowhere. It's probably all that stuff that had been in there, but when you get your brain thinking in a different way, it comes forward.
Absolutely. And the flow state really, I think, contributes to that sense of epiphany because again, it's that moment you go, "Oh, wow, those things relate." Or maybe I should relate those things, or how do those things relate? But those are
Right.
questions like you're less likely to do during the course of a meeting, right?
Right.
Or in a, while you're going through the grocery store trying to hit the things on your list, right? Those activities are focused in a way that don't allow mind wandering.
Yeah. I love in the book, I love the MacGyver analogy. For maybe some of the younger people don't remember that show, but I certainly do. And it was a great show. But I often did wonder, who's thinking up this stuff, that he comes up with and whatever. So those two writers that you highlight in the book, a man and a woman, they they must have really been creative coming up with some of this crazy stuff, right? Of how
Yeah,
MacGyver
they're
used everyday things to do amazing things.
for 35 years. And I met them in Seattle where they were scouting a television show that they were creating the pilot for. And I asked them that because it is the most imaginative use of resources. And how did they always have them? Like, how did they have this like pipeline of resources? Was just so fascinating to me to come up with these ideas. And their role literally was to find the MacGyverism. So the writers would write the story and put them into these pickles in these situations where then had to figure out what MacGyver activity could he do to actually find his way out of that activity.
Yeah.
And the stories that they told about how they thought about it, not so much what the specifics were, but how they thought about it and how they leaned into different experiences they had or different expertise that others had to put these things together was so enlightening to me that I just had to make the first chapter be about looking outside of the constraints for the solution. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people blame for having a lack of creative thinking capacity is I'm so constrained. I don't have money. I don't have resources. I don't have time. So how can I be creative when I'm limited? Well, just look at MacGyver because he never
Yeah.
had what he needed ever, right? And was always
Yeah.
able to figure out how to put 1 + 5 to get 15. Like
Yeah.
there was something about his capacity to look at what he had and be clear headed enough to recombine it into some solutions.
And talk about success of a show. I mean, the word MacGyver is actually in the dictionary now,
Correct.
which is wow. That shows you the impact that show had. Talk a little bit about the term you also use, which is called functional fixedness. What does that mean?
So we always believe that the purpose of any object or process is its sole utility. That's a very common thing, right? If I look at a microphone, I think it's a microphone, and I can't think of it as something else. But if I was MacGyver and I needed something, I'd think of all the parts that went into that microphone because there may be something inside that actually is in itself its own value, right? It creates value for me. And so the idea that I look at every object not as the sum of its parts, but its parts, just
Yeah.
literally what are the things that make it, it allows me to reassemble something from what is there. And then I'm not stuck on it just being a microphone. A really great example for people is you're on a hike. This is a really common thing. You twist your ankle and you need something to help you walk back down the hill. And so you don't have a splint. So you're in the woods. What do you make a splint out of? Right?
Yeah.
That the idea that you know that the thing you would have wanted isn't the thing you have. How do you go ahead and solve the problem with what you have? And so this idea that everything serves one function negates the value of its individual parts in another solution.
Yeah. You also talk about the scamper technique. Explain the scamper technique to us.
Well, the scamper technique is really terrific because it helps you break down a problem by looking at it from a number of different angles. In this case, 7 different angles. You're asking yourself questions, but not in a linear form necessarily. So again, if I wanted a microphone that was lighter, what part's the heaviest part, and what would I want to replace it with? So what would I substitute for the weighted stand in order to get the overall microphone to be lighter? That
Yeah.
would be an example. Or what 2 things could I combine in order to make something different than what I have? And so each of those letters stand for an action you can take or a move you can make, and then rethink the problem at hand through that lens. What if I magnified something? Or what if I minified something and made it smaller? What might that do? How might I change things? And so many inventions are actually built on the shoulders of previous inventions.
Yeah.
And when you think about how things got changed or evolved, it's because somebody maybe chose a different part or a different material or thought about its utility. I think the phone is the perfect example. Look at everything that the phone now combines. That when
Yeah.
we were originally thinking about cell phones, we were just happy it had a camera. And
Yeah.
now when we think about everything that's in there because of digital technology, it's become a different uh, a different element in our life. It serves a different purpose than voice calls. It
Yeah.
really serves so many other purposes. And so I think the idea that Scamper helps you sort of look at that initial idea through all these different lenses, you actually might find a way to not only improve it, but to invent something totally different because you've asked the question, how could I change this in some way? What might be in this object that I could reuse for something else?
And it gives you a structure to kind of work through the process. So, you know, you look at so many talented people, whether it's musicians or whether it's inventors or whatever. Great ideas probably come up all the time. But if the inventor or the musician or the talented person doesn't know how to implement it or doesn't know how to market it or whatever, it just doesn't ever get seen. And so either you have to have that within yourself, or you have to surround yourself with people that can do that and implement
Totally.
that idea.
And
Yeah.
and so, when we talk, you talked about in the introduction about the patent that we created for the first digital media subscription service before there was a Netflix or a Hulu or any of those things. And what that group of 11 people who wrote that patent are was all different jobs.
Yeah.
Everybody in that had a hand in how to solve the problem of creating authentication through a digital product to content that they paid for. So now we think it's nothing. You go to Netflix, they know what you have rights to. You go to Hulu, oh, this isn't in your subscription. You go to Prime Video and you say,
Mhm.
oh, you need an additional subscription because you don't have authorization for this content. But back in the early 2000s, that technology didn't exist as a solution. It existed in various parts. And it took 11 people who understood the technology and the business. And by the way, the legal and finance aspects of it too, because how did people get paid for the content? How do we assure the security of the content was only shown to people who paid for it. So literally the number of people that were involved in the creation of that patent and the invention of something new was across all disciplines. Not one of us could have executed it alone. It took all of us to create the environment or the conditions where that invention became meaningful.
Yeah, which is what collaboration's all about and why it's so important. You also use a quote in the book from Steve Jobs when he said, "Creativity is just connecting things."
They always, when I worked at Apple, a lot of people would say to me, he only improved things other people did. He
Yeah,
only did, improve things that already existed. Like he didn't invent the MP3 player. Yeah, but where are those now? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? The idea that improving something is not being creative is just so false. It's
yeah,
it's such a misdirect because the improvement, as Scamper would show you, could be the better invention,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That could be the thing that actually makes it better. And the fact that he thought beyond just the hardware player into a whole ecosystem of music and attached this iTunes store to the overall product of an iPod so that you could get it, and then made that store available to Windows users, just broke the market wide open, right? All of that connecting those dots created an entirely different experience for customers and also a different way to consume music for artists.
Yeah. So when you worked at Apple, did you have interactions with Steve Jobs?
So I interviewed with Steve for my job.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
it was a great experience in the, if nothing else, I knew I was going to have a cocktail party story to tell. Like I knew
Yeah.
that would be great. I
Yeah.
thought this isn't going to go very far, but at least if I get in the door and I only last a few minutes, I'll have a great cocktail party story. But it ended up being a really interesting experience and probably one of those kind of Forrest Gump memories of my life where I intersect with famous people who I admire and think, how did I end up here? How did I sit in this room with Steve Jobs having this? How did this happen? But
Yeah.
it was an amazing experience because his brain worked so fast and from so many different perspectives than what you would expect in a typical interview with a CEO who would be very rushed and want to just get through a couple of key questions and then kind of put the rubber stamp on it. Not Steve. That when I interviewed, I flew down just for the interview, and the VP of HR said to me, it's either going to be a 5 minute interview, at which point you should pack up your things and just head to the car and go to the airport because it's over, or it's going to be 60 minutes, at which point it's a good sign. You're those are the only two prospects. And so at
Yeah.
5 minutes, the door opened, his nanny and his kids came in, and I started gathering my things, and he sent them out and said, "Nope, I'm doing an interview. Thanks. I'll see you in a little bit." And he said, "Sit back down." And we talked for an hour. And I thought, this moment in my life, this ability to be here isn't something that I should take for granted. So I should be here and be confident and show up with the person I
Yeah.
am, not in awe of the person he is. And so in that moment, the very first question he asked me is, what's it like to be the product manager of crappy products? Because I hate all the products you worked on. And I thought,
Oh no.
right. And I thought, why am I here then? It
Yeah.
can't, that was just meant to be provocative, right? And to see how I could think on my feet and how I could take that type of direct questioning. And could I keep my calm and come up with an answer? And I basically said, no one sets out to make crappy products. There's a lot of factors that conspire for that to happen along the way, some of which you don't control, and at which point they end up in the hands of customers. And you're right, they aren't good experiences. But it isn't that I set out to make a crappy product. It's just the conspiracy of events, the timing, the money, whatever, uh, even the brand, right, that brought that product out could be something that undermines the quality of the product in the customer's eyes. So the idea that he was really provocative and trying to see how I sort of stood my ground, I thought was part of the interview process. And for me, seeing somebody like that, I think I could get really defensive or offended. And instead, I'm like, I got to meet him toe to toe. I've got to be somebody he isn't going to think is going to run into the night. And so I just had a great experience of getting a job offer after that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's known in folklore for sure that he was an interesting person and not easy to work with. And every once in a while, somebody will say, "Oh, he was the best CEO," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know about that." He obviously got stuff done and created beautiful things, but he also left a lot of dead bodies along the way too. So he was an interesting person that. Like you said, was provocative, was in your face, was blunt and direct, and but yet had that real creative side. So one of a kind for sure.
Absolutely. I think when I think about the things I learned working there, it wasn't necessarily how to be a great leader. So to your point,
Yeah, right.
it wasn't like these were behaviors that I was going to model everywhere I went. And in fact, there were some behaviors I specifically knew I wasn't going to do because how it made people feel didn't make me feel good. But I
Right.
think on the other hand, what it really did teach me was that originality is a widely overused word because while he might not have been the original digital music player, right, or the original computer, the idea that he had and how he took that idea into original territory is what was really important. And so people have this myth, just like they think creativity is a talent, that you have to actually create something wholly original for it to be creative. And that's just not true either.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that story. That was great.
Yeah.
You know, I love in the book too how at the end of each chapter, you have interviews, or you do an interview of people, and I say on the intro to this podcast that I'm a storyteller and I love stories, and it's just so great to hear people tell their stories about all the things you talked about in the chapter, which were amazing. And then here's real life examples of what people are doing relating to that. So I really admire you for structuring it that way. And then after that, you have exercises that you can actually sit down and do to, kind of get that creative muscle strengthened like what we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the interviews, everyone I picked in there had an impact on me creatively. They're all people I actually know to have influenced me. And what was interesting about them is they're not all the same kind of person, right? There's entrepreneurs, and there's uh, CEOs, and there's people who are writers of MacGyver. The idea that these people, because they entered my life, gave me some view of creativity and creative thinking was what started me on the path to have that structure. I didn't,
Yeah.
all of a sudden learn everything and become this guru of creativity. I had help. I had people who lifted up my thinking, who challenged my thinking, who demonstrated capacities that I saw as creative. And through that, I think others can learn too. And so asking the questions about their failures or how they get inspired, I thought was really interesting, because while they're not all the same thing, they all know the answers.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what it takes to get inspired when they're blocked. Everyone knows what they do, right, when they've hit a wall, or what they need to do to get over a failure. So the idea isn't that they're all the same, that they all know these things. And that kind of goes back to the point you made about self-awareness. A truly creative thinker knows how to activate their creative capacity, and every one of those people knew how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's very effective, and I think, as you said, those all had impact on you and helped you become who you are. And every leader I've ever talked to has the same story. These other people, these other experiences, collaborating, whatever. No one ever sits in a silo and becomes, probably a high level of success totally by themselves. There may be a
Absolutely.
few
And even,
examples, but yeah,
and even a girlfriend of mine is the one who turned me on to the exquisite corpse technique. She's one of my
yeah,
most inspirational friends, because she just always pursues some new talent and art. Like, and I get very jealous of her because she's actually good at it. But in this class that she took, she was given the exquisite corpse technique, and her team's project shows up in the book. But I hadn't even learned that. And so even my friends provide me that kind of inspiration that allows me to think differently about how I might express myself or what I might unlock in my team.
and you're open minded to see those opportunities when they come by.
Yeah,
So
that's a
that's
key
yeah,
thing. I think people
yeah,
think being open is the be all and end all. It's the start, it's the key,
yeah, yeah,
because then you can be curious. Then you can go to places that you might not know and be okay with what might be the answer there. And
yeah,
even if it's not what you want, it's also a place where I think when you're self aware, your triggers, the things that actually shut down your creative thinking, the emotions that really take you off course, as well as the ones that really trigger great thinking moments, right? Where are you your happiest and most relaxed to come up with great ideas?
yeah. Another thing that you explained in the book that I had not heard before, and I thought it was really effective, is so tell us a little bit about the differences between moods and emotions.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In the research I did, uh I think emotions tend to be a little bit more fleeting and reactive, and moods tend to be a state of mind. And so when you're in a mood, the mood might actually be prevailing, right? And that may be in itself the blocker. So doing something to change your mood, right, to give you
Yeah,
peace or to give you relaxation if you're stressed, or if you're depressed, that could pick up your spirits, right? That's a different form of management of your emotional state, right? Because it's a state of mind, and it usually lasts over time. And it may be several things that conspire to put you in that mood. But
right.
understanding and recognizing the things you need to get out of the mood is the first step. But for most people, it's the nature of reacting to things, and how that emotion in that moment clouds your ability to think clearly about things. And
Yeah,
a story I'll tell really quickly is I have a tension set engagement ring that I've had for 25 years, and it holds the diamond without prongs. And the other day I was putting away laundry, and I looked down, and the diamond was missing.
oh boy.
And think of all the emotion of what that memory was to get that ring and what it stood for. And oh my gosh, the cost. And oh my gosh, now I have to tell my husband that, oh, this is going to be such a like a thing. And I could easily have spun up right into this thing and told him, oh my gosh, this just happened. And I spun myself up. Instead, I thought, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, pulled open the drawer, and the diamond was sitting right on the top of
Yeah.
the clothes that I had put away. I don't even know how it happened. So I came downstairs and I showed him, I said, oh my gosh, did you even know this could happen? And he said, well, now we can get you a bigger ring. And what I liked about
Wow.
that story, we didn't go get a bigger ring, but what the point is, I didn't put him in a position of having to deal with my emotion,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I gave him the opportunity to come up with a better solution than
Yeah.
just
That's
fixing it.
yeah.
Because instead of dumping my hysteria on his lap and saying, well, what am I going to do? How do we do? What do we do? I need your help to find it. I just sort of methodically captured the emotion in that moment and channeled it towards finding it. And then when I told him, there was still the problem that the ring and the diamond were not connected, but the idea of solving it was just so much easier for us, right? At that moment,
Yeah.
like the possibilities were more positive than what his mindset would have been if he had to deal with and manage with my emotion. And so I
Yeah.
think that emotions not only hurt you and cloud your judgment, but they also make it difficult for others to help you to
Yeah.
see a creative solution because they're trying to parse your emotion out of the discussion in order to come up with that solution.
It's funny you say that because it's without really thinking about it. When my son was a young boy and we were growing up, we just kind of had this thing, and if he was grumpy or whatever, I'd say, you okay? And he kind of had this thing that we laughed about all the time. He'd say, I can't even stand myself right now. So we get in these moods where it's like, why am I in this mood? Because as you say, the emotion of it is gone, but somehow it affects us, for longer periods of time because it wasn't, it's over time. So I
Yeah.
thought that was an interesting distinction between the two.
Yeah, and I think you do different things, right? To manage emotions in the moment, there's things you can do to express equanimity, to try to find a balance. In the moment, there's an action you can take. If I'm stressed when I'm going on stage to give a talk, I box breathe before I go on because it just keeps my heart from racing, right? That's a
Yeah.
physical moment to avoid an emotion. But in a mood, right, you really have to do something more dramatic to change the tone of your thought process.
Yeah. Yeah. And like we said earlier, sometimes being self-aware that you're just, you know, grumpy or you're being a jerk
Mhm.
right now, get out of it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing in the book that I thought was really interesting is you used, I believe, as a personal experiment, Chat GPT, with why you were struggling with managing your frustrations with the hostility of the current politics. So tell us about what you were thinking and what.
So when I was facing some problems and doing some research on emotional management, I recognized that there are two vectors, subjective and objective, which is it happening to you or is it happening at large? And the other is structured and unstructured, right? And those things really are what we struggle with when we want to manage emotions. And the subjective and objective things make you recognize that you're internally responsible or that the climate is what you're dealing with. And in the case of a political situation or the rising crime rates, I don't, it isn't happening to me personally, and I can't fix the situation by myself. So it's a little bit unstructured in that I don't have a course of action I could take specifically. And
Mhm.
I may not be the only one who feels it. So in creating this GPT, what I wanted people to do was first recognize what they had control over and whether it was something that was happening to them specifically. Because if it is in that quadrant, you have a much greater chance, right, of managing that emotion more quickly and more fully. If it isn't, you have to look objectively at what's happening to see what it could do, what you can do to make yourself feel better under that circumstance. You personally to feel better under that circumstance. The
Yeah.
structured, unstructured thing is related to, is this going to consistently happen? Or is this a one-time thing that really caused that emotional reaction? And an example would be we had a lot of turbulence on the plane and everybody's on the plane feeling the same thing, but it's over now. How do I react to it may be different than my seatmate,
Yeah.
right? And so in that scenario, it's everybody had it, but it's over. It's not, it's structured. It happened, it's over, and now deal with it is the set of instructions that you need in order to manage your way out of that emotion. If it's
Yeah.
something that's, like I said, more vague and more broad, it's unstructured and it's not happening to just you. So there might be different courses of action that you would take to get out of that emotional depression or to feel that anxiety that you have around that particular event. And so I think for me, I need this a lot. I find myself not being always in tune with my emotional reaction to things, or when I'm overblowing my reaction to something that is now past and over. Okay, the
Yeah.
turbulence ended.
Yeah.
So do I have to now anticipate all the other pockets of turbulence for the rest of the flight, or can I just get over it because it ended?
Yeah.
And so I think the idea that you get some perspective back from GPT as to what matrix quadrant you're in gives you a set of tools and techniques to use to manage it. And that was, I think, really helpful because I'm coaching someone who is working to get a job in product management, and she swings between being excited about the interview and being petrified about the interview. And I said, neither of those things are going to make you show up in the interview good. You're going to be
Yeah.
really poorly managing both ends of that spectrum while you talk. And what you really need to do is find the space in the middle. And that
Yeah.
equanimity really is hard for people to do when they're in the throes of those extreme emotions. And so the GPT is there to sort of remind you, oh, you're over here, and there's 4 things you can do to help you cope.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's really great. And then one other thing too, in the book you talk about storytelling is it isn't just nice. It's a skill that that creative thinkers really need, and it's that cognitive capability contributing to as your title of your book is kind of the creative velocity. Storytelling is very effective on that.
Yeah, I think the thing that storytelling does for people is also build worlds, right? If you tell a story, you think about more of the details. You start
Yeah.
to think about more of what the impact is or more of what the causes are. And so you see the situation more fully. And so even just being good at telling the story, not to a large audience on a stage, but even just to your colleague, you're really coloring in the details that help give it meaning. And
Yeah.
that is one of the things that's really hard for generative AI to do, is to add meaning and purpose and value to what is happening. And so while you might get a story out of it, it might not be emotionally resonant, or it might not have the purpose of moving minds in a particular direction. And so being good at storytelling can really fill out the picture of what's going on, or what needs to change, or what's working and what's not working. And so practicing things like world building stories. Imagine a world where there are driverless cars. That's how that invention started,
Yeah.
right? Somebody imagined a world where you didn't have to get in a car with a driver, and they called it Waymo. Like, the idea that you can imagine a world where something dramatically changes is a really great creative skill.
Yeah, and I think that too, as you said, that human connectedness is part of it. You take like a singer-songwriter, for instance, and maybe AI can write a really great song, but when that musician's playing it for you live and you see it and you feel it, there's just something about that I don't think you can create through a AI machine.
Yeah, the context of cultural norms or values. We meet people and we assume they have the same values, but they don't, right?
Yeah,
Always, they don't always. And you think of yourself as a customer because you use a product, but not all customers are you. And
yeah,
so the prospect of telling the story outside of your own experience to others is also very helpful for perspective shifting. And
yeah,
perspective shifting is what's really necessary for creativity to land, right? You really can't just be creative to yourself. You have to imagine other people see the value in what you've created, the song that you're singing, or in the invention you made. I mean, we all like think about that product we love, right? Because it makes us feel good, not just because it works.
yeah, yeah. Well, Leslie, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you or haven't brought up that you want to be sure and get into the program
You
today?
did an amazing job of covering so many of the chapters and so many of the key points. I really, except for the general idea, I would say, which is just start, right? I
Yeah,
would just say that people should start, and they should think of generative AI as their, sparring partner in this. But take any of the techniques in the book and just start. That's what those exercises are for, right? Is just start sort of tackling some of these things and see where they lead you. Because if you can go about taking some of these exercises, for the first time with, I don't know if it's going to work, but maybe I'll find out something. Even that curiosity will move you forward.
Yeah, for sure. Well, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
I will leave you with this. I just posted this on LinkedIn, and I've learned this the most through this book. I dedicated my book to my husband because the reason I did that, not is just because he's my husband, but because he thought I could write a book long before I did. Because through the whole process, he believed I was going to be able to do a good job, even if he never read a chapter while I was doing it. And I think you need someone who believes in your creative capacity to really access it, to take the risks of your creative thinking. And
Yeah.
I dedicated the book to him because he is that person for me. And I said in my LinkedIn post, everybody needs that person. And if you can be that leader to your team, that person who believes in their capacity to think bigger, as opposed to criticizing them for not thinking big, if you can actually believe someone has something in them that they haven't tried themselves, then maybe they'll actually go try it and find out you're right. The idea as a leader that you can believe in someone else's capacity to solve problems is so powerful. And especially when they start to flail and don't believe they have it in them. Somewhere around chapter 3, I thought, is this any good? Is this really what it should be? And the idea that there is somebody who's like, just keep going. Come on, let's see the whole thing before we decide.
Yeah.
That really was helpful. And it ended up that chapter 3 wasn't chapter 3 in the final version, but it was the right chapter. It just wasn't in that order. The idea, though, that I kept pushing to get to that answer was a large part because I had somebody cheering me on to say, you can do this. You can actually imagine the outcome that you want and then deliver it. And I think leaders sometimes are more critical in that way. You're not thinking big as opposed to coaching someone to think big, how they might think big. And so I think creative leadership really encourages people to access that capacity, to test it, and to be curious as to how far they can take it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. So now
Thank you so much.
this is going to be published or released a few weeks down the road. So give us the date of when it actually comes out, and then I assume you can find it at most places you find books.
Yeah, it's available every place you would imagine online, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, uh, Amazon, and I think Amazon ships it on Tuesday the 6th next week. So I think it'll start shipping to people on the 6th
Okay, to the 6th of
of May.
May.
Sorry, the 6th of
Right.
May.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, again, this has been a real pleasure. I can feel your energy and your passion, which is great to interview somebody like that. So
Thank
appreciate it
you.
very much. And, I wish you the best of luck
Thank you.
and continued success. So maybe we'll see each other down the road some way.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.